Here's another one from UFOB. Dream Arcade Studio is the name of the person. You've likely seen near miss or close encounter data that's rarely public. Do you think these incidents pose a genuine collision safety concern, or do UAP often display a kind of avoidance intelligence? And how should aviation authorities adapt their protocols in response? And which phase of the flight or type of flight operation is most lacking in consistent high-quality data? If you could design an ideal data gathering program to fill those gaps, what would it look like? I think we've touched on a lot of this already, but if either of you want to add anything else based on this question.
If you, I wouldn't mind looking at the question again while I answer some. I'm sorry.
Let's put the question back up.
There's a lot of components there, but so in my experiences, the objects seem to be standoffish but nearby, and if you engage, they just continue to do what they were doing, and you're kind of assuming the risk for what happens at that point. Mm-hmm. That's kind of my general assessment of how these go. So they're not, you're not catching up by them. If you're like truly going to try to impact with this jet, I don't know what's going to happen, because I don't know of any cases of anyone that's tried to kamikaze one of these things to see if it would actually move, right? But I guess that would be the ultimate test. But I'm not aware of that. People have seen these on takeoff. They've seen them on landing. They've seen them, at altitude. They've seen them, across the spectrum of training operations for the military, day and night. Over land, I would say the data is perhaps surprisingly more inconsistent or more lacking over the land. Air traffic control radars they don't cover everywhere. They mostly use transponders nowadays. And at least on the coast, we have like air traffic identification zone radars for ensuring our national borders, essentially, right? So we do have those systems on the coast. We don't have those spread out in Nebraska and everywhere else. We don't have access to that data, so there's an assumption that there's interesting things there, but there is significantly more coverage on the coast for radars than over land.
Okay, just add a simple point here that at least looking at older data, up to about 2000, let's say, or a little after, I think the majority, answer the question raised, that the majority of pilot sightings we're familiar with occurred after dark, first of all, at altitude, and were generally lights in the night sky. Not always. Sometimes they were up close and quite a bit of detail on the phenomenon itself. Which again raises the question of energy management and navigation, and in flying in formation, for instance, since we have quite a number of cases that we found that there are more than one object involved in a flight formation, and they're very dynamic. I wrote a book on this some years ago called Project Delta, where I took a look at the data from around the world only on cases where there were two or more objects seen at the same time in the same place. And what did they have in common? Were there any cultural differences? Did the Italians, there were quite a number of cases around Italy, by the way, but did the Italians see something different than the French, than the British, the Americans, the Canadians, and so forth? Trying to look at patterns, basically, from a research point of view. And so our discussion so far today has been pretty much single objects, single phenomena, but we shouldn't forget the possibility of multiple at the same time. That raises some very interesting questions. Flight navigation and maintaining distance and flying formation, and then changing formations rather quickly in three-dimensional space. Ryan, I'd be interested if you have any cases like that with more than one phenomenon at the same time in place.
Yep. There's some instances where one of the, a group of objects was off the wingtip of an aircraft, and it was 3 individual spheres of light that were different colors each, and they were maneuvering independently within their kind of, some confined area, but operating off the wing, and then they, as a group, would reposition around the aircraft. Certainly others have seen, multiple objects, multiple spheres. There are a number of groups. Yeah. So it's I'd say probably like 30% or 20% of our cases involve more than one object.
I interviewed a B-52 captain. I won't go into a lot of details, except to say that he was delivering this airplane from Wichita right off the line, the Boeing line, to a Air Force base in the southwestern corner of the country. It had no radar, no guns on board, only a flight crew, and they were just ferrying the airplane to the base. Clear sunny day, the sun was about overhead, and what he told me he said basically that an object appeared, a round sphere, he estimated about 3 or 4 or 5 feet diameter, polished aluminum or silvery color, appeared off the left wingtip, and very soon an identical object appeared off the right wingtip. An object appeared behind the tail of the aircraft, and the tail gunner, the observer back then, he had no guns, radioed on the intercom that, hey, we're being tailed by this object that looks like this, and an object above and an object below. So there's 5 spheres, identical spheres, tracking this B-52 at cruise altitude on autopilot. Well, I asked him, what did he do in this case? Well, how did you respond? He said, well, I didn't know what to do. I've never been trained for that. And he said, I took it off autopilot and put it into an evasive dive to try to get away from these objects, whatever they were. He said, whatever I did, they maintained a constant position relative to the airplane. And so he finally kind of gave up, and he added power and came back up to altitude and continued on autopilot, because he said there's nothing he could do about it. And then he said, after I think he said 15 minutes of continued flight, the objects departed from the airplane in the exact opposite order in which they'd arrived. That, to me, says intelligence, control of some kind. It raises some fundamental questions, fascinating questions about all kinds of things. Why? Why did they do it? What were they? Who were they? Where they're going? They're going with him for a while. And one might say that they were simply tracking all his EM radiation. I don't know, looking at his turbulent pattern behind the airplane or whatever, aerodynamics, trying to find out better about a B-52 for whatever reason. I took this gentleman's story. He was a NASA pilot. I'll tell you that much. He wasn't a commercial pilot. He was a NASA pilot. I took his story seriously. And I'm still puzzled by that. And I thank him very much for sharing it. Because it opens up some very important questions that I think that aerodynamicists should look at, engineers, scientists, physicists, a whole cadre of professionals should be looking at this kind of data set.
That's fascinating. It was Sean Kirkpatrick from Arrow. I don't know if you remember, but remember that video that he showed at the NASA briefing? It was a sphere, a metallic sphere, and he made the statement that these are seen all over the world, and we don't know what they are. It seems like the metallic spheres are very widely observed, but I've never heard of a story like that. That's pretty remarkable.
Oh, and it was 1952. That's when it happened. 1952.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
I don't think we had the technology to do that ourselves in those days.
No.